As the emergency management representative, through the use of ASPR funds, we're able to put on this violence training seminar for you. Please, if you are on a phone or a computer with mic, please put them on mute. If you have a question or comment during the webinar, feel free to write them in the comment in the chat feature. At the end of the webinar, there will be some email addresses that you will be able to contact for certificates of training that will be made available to you from Vantage Point Consulting. So you can send names of those attending to one of the emails listed on the last slide of this presentation. Just to give myself some credence, my name is Patrick Todd, and I'm born and bred in Indiana, and I've worked in law enforcement since 1995 as a full-time police officer and as a part-time police officer. Right around 2001, I moved into healthcare security and emergency management full-time, and I really see the violence that can happen in the healthcare setting. And I've actually hired many police officers into the healthcare world, and we all feel that we've gone physically hands-on with more people in a healthcare setting than we ever did in law enforcement, just because of the nature of people's crisis and when they arrive at hospitals and the dangers that they see. So I want to give a little bit of credence on my part that I'm not somebody that's coming out of the blue. I do recognize some of the threats and some of the dangers that healthcare workers go through, and stand beside healthcare workers nearly every day when that I'm working in order to help protect and serve not only the healthcare workers but the general public. So talking about some objectives that we want to cover today, we want to discuss the importance of risk assessments and some common risks that we see with ambulatory surgery centers. We're going to discuss some preventative options and a little bit of preparedness that we can take on. We'll discuss some aggressive behaviors and the management of such, along with some intervention techniques. Intervention techniques are very difficult to apply, and so we're going to kind of go in depth a little bit on how we maintain and how we review those techniques. And then discuss the importance of training. I think every healthcare worker understands the need of training and how critical and important it can be to our operations. So keeping safe in an ambulatory surgery center. ASCs face very similar dangers that hospitals can have. That's a given. In Texas, in November of 2013, there's a documented event from an ambulatory surgery center where a patient's son was accused of trying to kill. He accused the staff members at the AFC of trying to kill his own mother. And so a nurse tried to intervene and protect the other patients because he was getting out of control, and he fatally stabbed that nurse at that Texas ASC. And so we know that there's a lot of dangers that come out of the ambulatory surgery centers. And as a matter of fact, OSHA lists healthcare workers overall in the top 4 most dangerous professions within the United States. Now, there are 4 types of workplace violence through the OSHA standards. You can have employer-directed violence, which is violence against authority at the workplace, usually an employee mad at a supervisor, wanting to punch our bosses, or wanting to cause some sort of injury due to some sort of problem we have in the workplace as an employer. There are also domestic directed violence, where we have partners that are engaged in violence against the object of their so-called affection. A lot of workplace violence that has bled over from the home life. So where a woman has left a husband and is a batterer, and if he can't find her, he knows where she works. So if she's hidden somewhere, he knows that she's probably going to go to work, and he'll come to his workplace to find her. So we know there's a lot of domestic directed violence. There's also property directed violence. Acts against any property that the ambulatory surgery center owns, whether it be from a visitor that may come in that's angry about something and destroys a chair, or an employee that is angry and kicks the door out as they're leaving, or drives into a facility. We recently, in the location where I work, had a police pursuit that wound up right through our ambulatory surgery center parking lot, and the person did quite a bit of damage to the property. And that's also commercially directed violence. So employee theft of money or property, which also includes some sort of level of violence. So now you probably realize ambulatory surgery centers vary from hospitals because hospitals can more easily absorb the expense of having security on site. They can usually eradicate some of that and absorb it in. In Indiana, I think in 2013 to 2014 era, they enacted legislation that allows hospital board of directors to create hospital-specific police departments. I believe Indiana University has done a lot of that through most of their facilities. Parkview in the Fort Wayne area, I believe, has done it, and many other facilities are incorporating hospital police departments that are fully accredited and have total law enforcement arrest authority within the property of the hospital, whether it's owned, maintained, or leased. So if an ambulatory surgery center is connected to a hospital through its parent organization or owned by the hospital, they would have the capability to have the police department from that hospital also patrol or respond to calls, as well as the municipal police department. An independent ambulatory surgery center would not have that capability in order to do that. And we all know about the dangers with the OSHA recommendations that we have an OSHA injury log where certain injuries that occur with employees must be reported, and that requires domestic violence or the other levels of violence, any sort of injury that occurs to an employee that results in a hospitalization or a fatality must be reported to OSHA, usually for fatalities within 8 hours of the occurrence. So let me talk a little bit about our risk assessment. Now, regardless of your affiliation or your parent organization, you should have some sort of a risk assessment done annually by somebody who knows what they're doing, who can go through and look over your hazards and what may be a danger or what may pose as a danger. Of course, if you're owned by a hospital or on your own, if you are accredited by a regulatory agency like the Joint Commission, where I work, we're getting ready for our Joint Commission survey anytime now, probably come this summer. So we are under the gun to make sure all those ducks in a row. And then there's also the HFAP, Healthcare Facilities Accreditation Program, who can offer hazardous vulnerability assessments. There's also the new one, and I'm not familiar with the program, but I know it's the acronym is DNV, and I believe they're coming out of Europe and really making waves into America as far as regulatory compliance. So as part of that, any organization, the ASC should have involvement in any sort of hazardous vulnerability assessment that's done by its parent organization or should do one on its own. Now, if you're an independent ASC, you can utilize templates. Kaiser Permanente has templates. There's a lot of templates out there. There's simple Excel programs that you can use that will weigh and mitigate. Most insurance companies will provide also adjusters that will come out and investigators that will also help with hazardous vulnerability assessments and will help weigh in. So there's a lot of ways to find that, ways to do the audits without having to expend a lot of capital or a lot of money at all. So it just depends. You just want to make sure that you have somebody that knows what they're doing and knows what to look for your assessments. So what are some of the risks ambulatory surgery centers face? The ones that I work with and have been involved with do have some degree of risk. They have uncooperative patients and family members. Usually these people present to them, they're cursing and arguing. Get a lot of family members that come in that are not happy with each other and already have a family dispute going on outside, and then it comes into the waiting room, and well, they may not like each other, or they just found out this procedure is going on or something like that, and then they're stuck with us for hours inside of our ambulatory surgery center, and it can be very uncomfortable. So we have a lot of uncooperative patients and family members. We also have the medication abuse and drug-seeking behaviors. Unfortunately, there's just a lot of people that are really drug dependent nowadays, have those desires, have those habits, and have those addictions, and that come in and have elective surgeries or necessary surgeries, and we will see them in the ambulatory surgery center. I really recommend, if your physicians are not already using inspect reports, make sure that you can offer inspect reporting or computers so that your physicians and your anesthesiologists can review inspect reports to make sure that before they prescribe unusual narcotics that they can look up people's records as to what they've been prescribed. So in Indiana we have the inspect reports database that allows physicians and law enforcement to go in and look at what people are being prescribed and when they're being prescribed it, how often it's getting filled, and from how many different pharmacies and physician scripts they have. So the inspect report that came about probably about 5 to 7 years ago now, maybe, as time goes by so fast, that has just been a really great tool for healthcare providers in making sure that people aren't being overprescribed medications that aren't warranted. Of course, patients have been restricted from using certain medications prior to surgery that modifies their behavior. When you're starting to cut back different things like the blood pressure medications or thinners and things like that, it can really alter people's moods. They become angrier easier. They already feel bad, and now we're making them feel even worse. So they're short-tempered, and they're mad at the world because of their medications being adjusted. We also routinely deal with patients with a criminal nature. So these folks that are already deciding that they're not going to abide by the rules of society, we still have to come in and service, and they will definitely try and observe what can I steal, what can I take, what can I bring. I regularly deal with certain patients that will tell me, I'm going to cause you problems. If you're going to be here and I'm going to be here, then we're not going to have a nice time. And at least they're courteous enough to verbalize their threats, and that way I know to increase my awareness of observations for them. And we also have rough neighborhoods and areas of service. We don't always get to choose our neighbors. Sometimes we build where zoning allows us, and sometimes we build where opportunity allows us, and so we don't always get the choice to decide who's going to move in beside us. So we have to make sure that those that are around us are safe to be around, and so we have to observe, well, how safe is this neighborhood that we're providing services in, and what do we have to do to make sure we keep ourselves safe, and do we allow people just to come and go freely. Near the ambulatory surgery center and hospital where I'm at, the children regularly dislike me because I don't let them ride their bicycles through the area or skateboard through our parking garages, and they don't understand that when people are coming to us that they're drugged already, or they're leaving medicated and unhappy, and they're not always watching for children that may be playing in the area. So you have to be careful with your area of service and the community that is around you. Of course, we have to be aware of any medical malpractice accusations. Sometimes things don't always go right. Sometimes the timeout processes aren't always followed as they should be, and every timeout process should be very well defined and very documented. And it's a necessary timeout process for patient safety, and it's an excellent process, but not always do we slow down and make sure that we're accountable to those timeout checklists, and so medical malpractice accusations can sometimes come about. We also have patients that have to recover from anesthesia, come up swinging. Most nurses that have been in the surgery setting have seen very funny things. There was recently the YouTube video from the folks, I think they were up around the Indianapolis area, where they filmed their sister coming out of anesthesia after her wisdom teeth were cut out, and how she believed that there was a zombie attack going on, and it was the zombie apocalypse. And so people are just very disoriented coming out of anesthesia and respond in different manners. We have to be very careful. Of course, patient family reaction to any unexpected event that goes through the surgery. We're dealing with people's lives in surgery procedures, and sometimes the unexpected happens, whether they may code or die, or something happens where it's very unexpected and very bad, and we have to be able to roll with that and control the family's reactions for the safety of the staff and for other patients and visitors, and have a little bit of plan on how we're going to deal with it should the unexpected happen. Patients in discharge are unsatisfied with service. Sometimes surgeries don't always cure what's ailing them, and they will come back and they've gone through this horrible process that's entailed a lot of pain and recovery, and then they get a bill that they're unsatisfied with. So people will often come back, storm back in the building, and raise Cain because they're unsatisfied with service, and now they're unsatisfied with a bill and payment. As I said earlier, patients or staff that are part of domestic violence and abuse situations. Healthcare is heavily populated on the nursing side with women, and we want to make sure that all of our staff members are protected, no matter what gender they may be. We don't want to have any bias. We're not into the healthcare arena to have any bias against anybody, and so we want to make sure that any ambulatory surgery center and any owner-operator provides a level of protection for all their staff members to some degree. Usually management should probably be able to have some sort of a avenue where employees that may feel threatened at home and where that may carry over at work, there should be that open line of communication for that threatened employee to come to their manager or their bosses and say, this is going on with my significant other, I'm leaving him, I'm feeling threatened, and I'm getting a protective order, or I have a protective order. And then they should be able to share those protective orders. I've worked in several different facilities where because of that open line of communication, the person that feels threatened is very openly be able to bring in pictures and pass around to frontline staff members and say that if this person shows up, please call security or please go ahead and call police. Also at that point in time, administration can also be very forward thinking as far as releasing video footage. Should something occur where a protective order is violated, or if an act of violence occurs, it shouldn't take 500 layers of red tape in order to make sure that the evidence is turned over to the proper authorities for prosecution and justice and protection of the employee or the patient if need be. And of course the patient in any sort of setting. Now hopefully you don't have a whole lot of physicians or providers physically fighting for scheduling access, but there are times whenever doctors and surgeons want to pop in some sort of unscheduled surgery or something like that. They demand a room. The block scheduling doesn't allow them to do what they want to do in a timely fashion, and surgeons sometimes can lose their tempers a little bit, hopefully none that you work with, and so you have to be prepared to be able to deal with those surgeons. I know in a lot of ambulatory surgery centers, those are also your owner-operators, so you have to be able to have crucial conversations with them and talk legitimately about, well, we got to, this case is going to take this long. We've got to be able to do this sort of scheduling. So you have to be able to talk to them and involve them in conversations. Talked a little bit about the bill payment disputes and terminated employees. We have to, as a business, and as we terminate employees like anywhere else that they're going to be disgruntled, we're going to have plans for if they come back, if they cause problems, not just if they malign you on Facebook or Twitter or something like that, but genuinely try to come in and cause a problem. So there's a lot that goes into a program. There's a lot of training involved with staff members for any sort of healthcare facility, but specifically for an ambulatory surgery center. And just like nursing competencies for procedures and things like that, all staff should have some sort of safety training. Most of this training should stem from your orientation process. Most facilities, almost all hospitals, will have an orientation period that should cover safety situations, disaster situations, hazardous situations, and independent ambulatory surgery centers. Hopefully they also will include some sort of a general orientation period that will also increase their safety training. So simple technology aids that the staff can use, like portable phones with nurse call systems, panic buttons, the availability to have cell phones on them can allow staff to call for help quicker. But the key for that is the training of the staff members to use them. I've gone to a lot of places where they've checked their panic buttons and the staff had no idea how to work the panic buttons. And a lot of panic buttons will be set for a 3 to 5 second alert before they actually will send a signal. That way, in case they're pressed inadvertently by leaning up against a desk or bumping them in the pocket. So you've got to push and hold those buttons for 3 to 5 seconds. There are some buttons you can buy that will give you a feedback and will vibrate when the message is sent to a computer that will send out call. A lot of the nurse call systems, both Sarah systems, Cisco systems, they will have built-in ways in order to get help for a nurse. But again, people have to know how to use them. One of our Cisco phone systems where I work, we recently switched to, where the call button for aid was on top of the phone. So it was clipped to the nursing staff's waist, and they could see down and they could see the red button and push it. The phone that we now use has it on the side, and there's no alert for these phones. All that it does is opens up the microphone on that phone, and then it opens up the hearing part of the phone for other people to be able to hear what's going on. So if the nurse gets into a bad situation, she can push the button to activate her phone, and then she's got to know that she has to verbalize where she is inside her facility to call for help. So if she's in a post-op area and is pinned up against the wall, she has to activate that phone, activate that button to say, I am in post-op room 2, or I am at OR 3, and I have a problem with a patient. They have to be trained on what to say, because whenever they're very much in a state of fear, the brain kind of slows down quite a bit. One other part of training is involving local responders. So you have to assess how quickly can help arrive. As we all know, 3 or 4 minutes of a critical situation can feel like 10 or 15 minutes. So have you assessed how quickly aid can come to you when you need it? Has law enforcement, the fire department, even your EMS, have they toured your facility? A lot of ambulatory surgery centers with their fire departments and so forth response may come from medical situations. The fire departments may also come to look at the fire suppression equipment. But have you had law enforcement come through just to stop in, just to feel comfortable stopping in, knowing the access, especially if you're in a big building that you share property with other sites on? So if you have an ambulatory surgery center as a suite inside of a facility and there's other offices, you want to make sure that law enforcement knows which area to come into, which area is yours if you're calling them for a response for a situation that's dangerous. So it takes a lot of intentional effort, and training must be intentional. And sometimes we often think that someone knows what you know is obvious, but they may not realize it's obvious. So training must be ever intentional in order to pass it on to somebody and make it worthwhile. Let me discuss with you a little bit about the environmental security. Through environmental security, there's a concept that's kind of permeates law enforcement. It's called the crime prevention through environmental design, and it's CPTED for those with an architectural background, but crime prevention through environmental design. And the concept that it looks over the property and the physical structures and sees how can I use this to make things safer, or what needs to be changed to make things safer. And so the whole idea is just to kind of take a step back and look at how safe is the facility. And there's some pointed things, and a CPTED study takes hours to do and walk through a facility and review a lot of responses and review crime history in the area. But it can also be very simple, as much as how do you lock down the facility? How quickly can you lock your doors down or open them back up and get out of them? Is your facility a key controlled facility versus electronic access control? If you have keys floating out and you lose track of keys, how good is your key control policy? Are people held accountable? And if you terminate employees, how quickly can you get that key back, or do you have to rekey? If it's an employee, or excuse me, electronic access, how quickly can you shut down an employee's electronic access? So all that stuff has to be evaluated and intentionally evaluated. And then simple things: can staff evacuate quickly? Ambulatory surgery centers, to the best of my knowledge, are business occupancies, so you don't have to drill as often as inpatient hospitals do, but every employee should know all the exit routes available to them. And most of them have several. I know several that have general entrances for the employees, general entrances for patients, and then the physicians that like to have general entrances or private entrances from their office suites. So there's a lot of different entrances and exits that employees know about that the general public doesn't know about, and you want to make sure that all those exit routes are known to your staff. And simple things like, is your outside lighting adequate for leaving at night so that you can see a large distance outside away from the building? Given most of the ambulatory surgery centers are not going to be open at night, but those that may be up in the Lake County area and down the Vandenberg County area that adhere to Central Standard Time, it'll get dark at 4:30, 5 o'clock or earlier in the winter time. And so we want to make sure their outside lighting is adequate so that people can visualize what they're going into. Also, the last bullet point I have here about the CPTED, our plans kept cuts so they extend no more than 2 feet above the ground for your line of sight. We call this the 2-foot, 6-foot rule. So we want plants no more than 2, sometimes 3 feet above the ground, depending on what the plant is, and then our trees trimmed up 6 feet. And this allows you to visualize, is there somebody crouched down behind that bush? Most good-sized adults are not going to be able to make themselves smaller than 2 feet. So that we can see somebody crouched behind a bush. And then also with the 6-foot, are those trees trimmed up so that there's no foliage in my line of sight. So if somebody is standing behind that tree, hopefully I'll be able to visualize them. And also the foliage on the trees, is the foliage trimmed and done properly? I see a lot of parking lots that the people will decorate with trees and bushes, but particularly the trees that they will plant right near a parking lot or lamp post, And so at nighttime, that tree blooms out and has blocked any light escaping from that light pole. So we really got to make sure that our foliage is controlled when the plants are in bloom, so that make sure everybody can stay safe and you can visualize away from your facility, because you don't want to walk out and have somebody waylay you from behind at night or come out from behind from a bush. So the more you can see out, the better off you're going to be. Of course, internally, you want to assess your waiting area closed off securely from the pre-post-op areas. You don't want people going back and forth at will. You want to make sure you can control those areas. Now, also, are there security cameras in the public areas and in the exterior areas that all staff members can see? Sometimes management will use these cameras only for evidentiary purposes. They want to protect the infrastructure, and they don't always think to allow staff members to use it for protection. In many facilities that, in the system that I work in, we make sure that switchboard operators, secretaries, some clinical staff have access to particular cameras within their views through Microsoft, well, basically through software systems. So they access particular cameras, not all cameras that we have, but just particular cameras, and that way they can kind of see what they need to see. So if you have an area of a high-risk service area externally, when staff's leaving at night, they can visualize those cameras. They can pull those cameras up on the desktop, scan the parking lot area, then they can exit. And so those cameras, again, are not only used by the management for evidentiary purposes or protective purposes, but it gives them a full value to allow staff members to use it for protective, for their own protection. We also want to look at the furniture and an interior setup of property. Is it made for safety? Will you be able to egress through routes? Joint Commission is always big on their egress pathways, and that serves for patient safety to be able to roll patients out on beds as need be and evacuate. But whenever there's a dangerous situation, people are going to be running all over themselves. It's not unusual in high-risk areas that have been through an armed shooter situation to see shoes left behind from people that are just literally running out of their shoes. We also have to think about televisions and things like that, lamps that are bolted down or screwed down. Where I work, if it's not bolted down or screwed down, there's a good chance it's going to disappear pretty quickly. But we want to make sure things are locked down and screwed down, tied down, whatever we've got to do to make sure that they are safe. And we want to be able to limit items that can be thrown at us if a situation gets dangerous. One other thing on the environmental security is that we want to make sure we control our access point for visitors and patients to enter the surgery center. Now, release points are often very different because we bring them into the OR, they're back in recovery, and they may exit to a different door. You usually won't or may not take your patient out the same way to the public waiting room and release them that way because they're not feeling very good or maybe not be looking as good. So oftentimes our release points are different than our intake points, and that's okay. But whenever we are allowing visitors and patients to wander back and forth, we want to make sure we can bring them in through one access point that's always supervised and observed by some sort of staff member to control that access. And then we want to make sure that there's proper barriers that are between our desk attendants and the patients in the waiting area. There's a new level of glass out made by a company on the East Coast, and that can be shot, can be hit, can be beaten with ball bats and any sort of destructive device short of being driven through. And it's designed to withstand a duress for up to 6 minutes. And it's a great barrier that a lot of architectures are working into newer facilities, and nothing is going to be foolproof, shatterproof, or bulletproof for a long given period of time. And again, this point of this class is just designed enough to buy time for people to take a safe action. So you want to make sure that you have the proper barriers for your staff, even if it's just some sort of plexiglass that will delay a person from jumping over a desk. And of course, in the patient rooms, is the room set up so that the provider and the nurses can remain close to the door for fast escape. You do not want to allow yourself to get caught up against a wall with an angry patient that's coming out of anesthesia. So when I first got into healthcare, I remember a patient that was coming out of anesthesia, and he literally was about 6'4", had nothing on but his gown and his cowboy boots that boosted him to about 6'6", and he picked up a nurse by her throat and pushed her up against the wall and pummeled her, thinking that she was trying to do evil acts upon him. And he wound up breaking out some of her teeth, broke her jaw, and did a lot of facial damage. And she's still a nurse. She basically had a heart of gold and understood what he went through. And whenever he was controlled by 6 males, and we got him down, restrained him, and proper medication was given. He was reoriented after some time. He had no clue what he had done, and he was a super fellow after that, but just that anesthesia really threw him for a loop. So we know that we have to be very careful and make sure that we have exits so we can get our fast escapes if we need to. And also, are there particular consultation rooms or particular identified safe rooms to put angry patients and visitors? A lot of times we bring the family members back to a certain area, and hopefully those consultation rooms would have separate access maybe for patients or for family members to be brought into, and that the physicians or the consultation staff could come in from a different area and to allow them to leave if need be. But we want to make sure we have some pre-identified safe rooms or some consultation rooms where we can put our somebody who is really upset. So some aggressive behavior. Now, we already know patients are likely going to be nervous coming in. We want to offer them our services. We want to be sure we can handle their anxieties. We have to show them support. These are our customers. A lot of our ambulatory surgery centers, we're looking at making a profit. We're looking at making sure that we have a chain of customers coming in and providing their needs and improving their lives. We want to make sure that each person is treated nicely and respectfully. So we want to be very flexible with managing their discomforts and their fears. We want to make sure that we can notify others of their management in our workplace of suspected dangerous behavior. But we have to recognize anxiety over aggression because we don't want to overreact to it. The patient wants to know that he's cared for, and if we overreact to them just coming in and asking some questions out of fear, we don't want to jump down their throats and make them feel unimportant or make them feel demeaned in any way whenever they have a lot of anxieties that they're presenting to us. So we want to have the proper interaction with our patients and making sure that we can recognize when they are distraught versus when they're angry, when they're nervous versus when they're upset with us. And now if you're like my facility where we use a lot of the AIDIT terms, and sometimes in classes when we talk about AIDIT, people start getting nauseous and rolling their eyes and saying, oh great, here we go with those scripts. And for those of you who don't know AIDIT, it's the terminology of acknowledgement. Staff introduces themselves. They give a duration of what the patient may go through or experience. They give an explanation as to why they're going through this process, and we always make sure we tell that person thank you. Now the key is that some people, some bosses want to script this out totally. My general feeling of thought is that you really want this to flow naturally because so many patients are reoccurring to us in the healthcare world that, and people know when it's false and when it's forced. So you want your staff to interact naturally with people, but you want them to follow this guide of acknowledging the patient, introducing ourselves to them, giving them a duration explanation of what's going on. Like, hi, I'm Patrick. I'm going to be your surgery nurse for the day. Your process is going to probably take about 3 hours, and then you'll go into recovery, and you'll hopefully be recovered within an hour or so, and we'll get you on your way home. And then, of course, we always want to thank them, and again, we don't want to be doing, and I keep constantly thanking them over and over and over and over, but we want this to, again, to be natural. Now, one thing that I tell my staff members, especially those who think that this is a lot of silly nonsense, is that whenever you're using this interaction with them, you're allowing your staff member, you're allowing yourself to be able to engage the patient and their family. Because when you walk up to them and you look them in the eye and you say, hi, I'm Patrick, I'm going to be your nurse for the day, and I'll be taking care of you, at that time you can assess how cooperative is this patient going to be. If they start grumbling, oh, I don't want to be here, Jesus, let's just get this over with, you can start a proper dialogue with that patient. Some people have had surgeries all throughout their lives, and it's not a big deal, and they're like, okay, well, let's go in and let's start this process, or you know, let's go do whatever we got to get done. And some people are very fearful. I'm 43 years old almost. I have never had a surgery done in my life, so I would probably be scared to death my first time going into a surgery, and I'd probably have a lot of questions, even though I work in a healthcare setting, and unfortunately that may add to a little bit to my apprehension, but I would have a lot of questions and may annoy the staff members as much. So you really need to ask, what's the patient fearing? What concerns do they have about the processes they're going to be going through? And it really helps build that rapport so that you are getting to the ability to assess that patient. Is this person going to be uncooperative with me? Are they already cursing at me? Are they already yelling? What's going on? So those sort of scripted process and interactions really help us as staff members if we read the signs properly. Also, some of our younger staff members that don't have communication skills can fall back to these processes that will open them up and allow them to be engaged in our patients. So when we're watching for aggressiveness, we really got to watch body language. That's first and foremost. People who red face and their jaw set and they're locked, veins popping out of their foreheads, those are all telltale signs that somebody's probably a little bit angry and mad at us. Of course, the fist balled up. Not too long ago, an adult male was with his elderly mother in one of our treatment rooms, and he was being really rude and aggressive towards our staff. So we had him go out to a waiting area, and he just started pacing back and forth in front of the intake window, and then he started staring our staff members down through the window. So we have security on site, and the security went to near the staff member, and this visitor started punching his hand. So he balled up one fist, started punching it into the palm of his other hand like he was going to punch somebody or break down the glass. So security went out and spoke with him and tried to calm him down, and it was clear that he was, you know, he owned the world and nothing was going to appease him. So we had to have him leave the property under threat of calling the police if he didn't leave. So we got to watch that body language, and we got to act upon it. If we continue just to let it go and ignore stuff, it's going to bubble the wrong way, and we want to make sure that we're on top of it. So if you're unsure why someone is presenting this way, and if it's safe to do so, not everybody is made for confrontation. Again, the confrontation is a unique technique, and having been in law enforcement since 1995, there's times when I'm still uncomfortable. There's times that there's people, it's like, I want more people behind me before I approach this guy. So we've got to make sure that when we do something, it's safe to do so. So usually that person that's upset, if we can open a dialogue with them, we're going to give them a chance to discuss that issue, because we want to earn their trust, and we want to earn them as a customer. Well, we want to make sure that we're making a difference not only in our patients but those with them, and so we want to help them realize that we do care about them. And again, if they appear unapproachable, you may have to gather other staff members. If the telltale signs of violence, you know, if he's already punching things, broken things, then you're just going to have to go to law enforcement if need be. With verbal abuse and inappropriate language, you really have to set some boundaries. Be very clear about the boundaries. Again, whenever we have drug-seeking behavior, and I'm not a clinician by trade, you know, so I'm an allied staff member, but you know, I've got these terms in here where people say that they want their drugs, they want their narcotics, and we can tell them, we can recognize, well, I can see that you're angry about not getting your medication that you're wanting, but don't curse at me about it, okay? I'll take your request to the physician, we'll see what we can do to help you, but the doctor's going to have to take this course of treatment. So we want to make sure that we're setting boundaries and setting the tone, okay? We get a lot of people that start screaming and yelling at us or towards us. If we can let them vent safely, that's great. If we can take them to a private room and let them burn off some of that energy, get that mood out, that's okay. We want to make sure that they know that we're concerned about them, but once it gets to becoming more abusive, we want to make sure that they know that they don't have the right to abuse us. So we can say to them, Mr. Smith, I can see you're upset, and I'll see what we can do to help, but do not curse. And you can give some sort of, whether it be a true or false or whatever, you can give some sort of reason why, like there may be children in the rooms nearby. I have one staff member that she hates the F-bomb, so when people come in and they're using the F-bomb, even if it's not in a bad way, if it's just part of their everyday vocabulary and they're dropping the F-bomb, and she'll stop them and she'll say, please don't use that F-word near me. Every time you use that sort of language, it distracts me from focusing on your needs. So if you would not use that kind of language, I would really appreciate it, so that way I can focus on taking care of you. And so she does it in a very mild way that sets the boundary to please don't do this, but make sure that she stays focused on them and their needs and serving them. So again, you gotta allow sometimes people to vent if it can do good. Make sure that you stay back anytime you're interacting with somebody who's obviously starting to become dangerous, where they're pacing, they're ranting and raving, or they're staring you down. You want to stay back several feet, at least 2 to 3 feet back, so that you do not seem confrontational. You want to respect their personal space. Nurses get into people's personal space as part of their jobs. You know, they see and do things to people that their own spouses have never done to them or have never seen when they're placing things, catheters, IVs, and the like. So nurses are very comfortable inside of somebody's personal space. Patients are not so comfortable. So we really got to be careful when we get in somebody's space, and again, especially if they're coming out of anesthesia and you're starting to mess with an IV or you're messing with a catheter, how are they going to react? So we've got to control our emotions. And I know working in healthcare, we see some funny things and people do things when they're coming out of anesthesia, but we have to make sure that we control ourselves. And if we allow ourselves to be upset or angry, that only allows them to control the situation more, and then they can become more disruptive. So with physical interventions, you have to define when you go hands-on. Does your ambulatory surgery center have policies and control of when you go hands-on? Is there a clinical need, such as confusion coming out of the anesthesia for restraints and things like that? So any restraint policy, of course, has got to be clearly defined. Providers, clinical staff have got to understand what the restraint policy entails. And surgeons, physicians are not always knowledgeable about restraints as nurses are. The nurses apply them, they're accountable to the rules, they're accountable to the safety and well-being of the patient, and so the nurses have a high level of knowledge about restraint use, and when the doctor's going to come in, check the restraints, or sign off on the order. And we all know, or everybody in the healthcare world should know, that the wrong technique can kill a person. We see not too unfrequently where the wrong technique of restraints have inadvertently gotten somebody killed, and so much so that Joint Commission and other regulatory agencies really monitor the use of restraints, and the United States Department of Health will really review all restraint policies. So if you're an ASC that has some sort of restraints, you need to make sure that you use those policies and people and staff are competent on applying policies for restraints. And if it's a visitor, the foremost recommendation I can give you is get the police there if you feel like it's a hands-on. Never go hands-on with someone unless it is an absolute last resort, and only if they're going to prevent some sort of physical harm to someone. If it's property, call the police. We're not worried about property if we have to go hands-on with a visitor, as long as they're not harming themselves or someone. But if they're tearing up something, get the police involved. And then you have to reconcile, if you go hands-on, if you have a policy that allows you to go hands-on, does your staff have the physical capabilities to control somebody that's physically acting out? I've worked with other personnel from other departments, particularly our maintenance department, with one gentleman who was 75 years old, and he told me, he said, if there's an emergency situation with somebody acting out, I'm not coming because I'm not going to get pummeled while I'm on the job. And so I respected that and respected him for telling me that. So, and again, as I've been in law enforcement for over 20 years, there are times when I know I'm not going to engage this person until I have some backup. Usually hands-on fights only last a few minutes, but they can physically drain a person. Injuries can last and continue on for a long time because our bodies are just not accustomed to that level of stress. And unless you're somebody that works out and you're a jiu-jitsu fighter or something like that, it takes a lot out of you whenever you go hands-on. You also have to consider how are you warning others of a danger. So does your ASC have a public address system or an intercom system that can warn others or call for help? And are all staff members trained on how to use that call system? So you have to consider with the training, what's the warnings for an out-of-control patient or an out-of-control visitor? So, and I challenge you to review some of your policies on overhead alerts and how you warn other people. And in the Indiana Hospital Association, last couple of years we've had a big push about using codes, or excuse me, using plain language over our codes. Plain language is very beneficial in that it can warn everyone at the same time. In a lot of facilities, if they're using a code on the overhead for a dangerous situation, the patients and visitors don't know what's going on, and so the staff may react and keep themselves safe, but nobody tells the visitors what the danger is. So who's going to be challenged or charged with going out and putting themselves at risk to tell the visitors in the waiting room that there's a violent situation going on, or that a patient has a knife and is stabbing people? Whenever, if you have the ability to just do it on the overhead as a blanket statement, and people say, well, that will cause panic and that will scare people. And that's something you have to weigh in your facility and what you're comfortable doing. But such as an active shooter situation, if there's guns going off, it's probably going to cause a little bit of panic anyway. And so you just want to make sure that you give all the information you can. And you want to make sure deciding who's going to make the decision to call the police or take action, and who has management's authority to be able to be empowered to do so. Does any staff member have the knowledge, the capacity to call 911 and report something, or is there a structured mechanism that somebody wants to evaluate what happens? Of course, when we talk about aggressive behavior, we will have to talk about weapons. Again, you have to look at, does your ASC have any policies that staff can default to in order to ask someone to keep weapons outside the facility? If you give the employee tools to use and fall back on it, it helps them control the situation cleaner and neater, rather than just having to make up stuff off the cuff. Now, I added in there about signs creating more problems and alleviate them. Sometimes people will put up signs out front that say no weapons allowed, no guns allowed. My own facilities have those, but we're able to support people who come in and argue with us about that signage because we're violating their Second Amendment rights, or we're able to say, well, we don't want weapons in here. It impacts our healthcare environment, and the healing process may be interrupted. But we also carry firearms inside. As far as we have armed security, armed uniformed staff members who do carry. So we're able to offset that argument by saying we tell civilians not to carry their firearms, but we provide that layer of protection. So if you're somewhere that has that signs and you don't offer some layer of protection internally, you may be asking for more problems than you're helping solve. And then, are staff members trained in responding to the threat of an armed person properly? They have the protocols from the Department of Homeland Security with the run, hide, fight protocols. And so do we teach that? Are staff members reminded how and when to implement particular steps of the run, hide, fight? Because unlike, if we're responding to a code blue situation or something like that where somebody's in arrest and there's a certain pattern of things that happen and certain processes that happen almost every time, a run, hide, fight drills, active shooter drills, every drill may change on the outcome. Employees may say, well, I need to go this way rather than that way, or I may need to hide here versus run here. Now, for the most part, our patients voluntarily come to surgery centers to find ways to improve their lives. They want surgeries to heal them, to help them. And so when anger and aggression become apparent, we need to really leverage the fact that everyone there in the ASC wants to help them and get them better. Whenever you have somebody that's distraught or upset, that connectivity with them, that building that therapeutic rapport with them, helps to improve their lives a great deal and helps to improve your relations with them. And we want to be open and honest about delays or problems. Talk with patients about things that we're able to do so without violating sort of HIPAA rules or anything like that, because people will generally understand. When my wife was pregnant with our children, and we would go to our obstetrician, and he would be delayed because he was delivering. Well, we were very much understanding that, more so after our first birth was an emergent C-section, because the umbilical cord was wrapped around my son's neck, and he had to come out pretty quickly, and he's okay. But we understood that the medical world can be topsy-turvy, and things don't always go done within an hour or things like that. So make sure you share information with your patients as much as possible if there's problems that arise. You can be empathetic with people. I say that empathy is the art of connectivity. Again, you're watching their body language, you're understanding their words and what they're truly, really saying to you. when we walk by people in the hallway and we say, "Hi, how are you?" and they say, "Fine," if that person's bawling and squalling and got their arms crossed and say, "Oh, I'm fine," and we just say, "Okay," and we walk on, we really haven't cared about them. We're not at all in the least bit concerned about how they truly are. But if somebody shows us that, and we're empathetic enough to read that body language and stop and talk to them and try and find out how we can help them, that's the kind of healthcare provider we want to be. So, but again, no matter how much we want to help others and do good, if we drop our guard and become injured, we ourselves cannot help anyone. So we want to make sure that we have the proper training to go, if we have to go hands-on with somebody, or if we have to do anything that's in a dangerous environment. We train all the time on how to help people. We go through competencies frequently on how to do procedures. When we're dealing with people in high-risk situations, we also need hands-on, face-to-face training for managing aggressive behavior. And that's essential for anyone working in the human services field. Managers have to make sure that training is provided to all levels of staff members. So it can be modified to take into consideration what interaction people have. So the back person that works in billing and does interact face-to-face with people may just need phone etiquette and how to disarm people verbally, where frontline desk people, secretaries and like, may really need some hands-on skills on what to look for and what signs and symptoms people may indicate that show their behavior. So Vantage Point Consulting, we provide a lot of additional resources and training in different things. We will cover exercise developments. We have some different webinars and trainings coming up, as well as exercise workshops for ambulatory surgery centers and other healthcare facilities. We try and make sure that we enhance and improve the healthcare sector and make it as safe as we possibly can. So I want to thank you for listening to me today. Thank you for your attendance. Again, if you wish to have certificates of training, you can submit names of those listening to the webinar today to one of the emails listed here on this page, jfogler@vantagepointc.com or jsfogler@vantagepointc.com. And if you have any questions or general comments, please, I want to open it up now for discussion, so please post them on the chat feature. And I appreciate your concern, and please make sure you talk with individuals, make sure you leverage the resources in your community to keep you and your staff protected. So thank you.